So hello, I'm glad to welcome you on our panel 11. It is called Education, Pedagogies and Psyche. We are going to have here 3 presentations from Parul, Bansal, Guadalupe, López, and me, Natalya, Ulanova. We've decided to make it one by one and then to make the main session of questions. So we are going to start with Parul Bansal, and I'm glad to give her a word.
Thank you, Natalya. Good evening from India. I'm Dr. Parul Bansal, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Lady Shri Ram College for Women, University of Delhi. My favorite conversations are in the fields of critical psychology, psychoanalysis, and qualitative research in psychology. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conference, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my mind on the pandemic crisis. The title of my talk is Psychic Construction of the COVID-19 Pandemic. I'll just share my screen. Even if we are not infected by COVID-19, we are plagued by the specter of the coronavirus contagion. This pandemic is clearly more than just about the disease COVID-19. At the core of it is not just a biological entity called coronavirus, but also the outbreak of public fears, anxieties and panic, suspicion and stigmatization, trauma, grief and guilt, rational and irrational actions to contain and prevent the disease, and the imagination of the new normal. These are a few big psychological aspects amongst the many other plots that define this worldwide pandemic. All of these psychological dynamics are as highly contagious as the disease. In this talk, I try to unravel the psychological processes constituting the psychosocial pandemic, accompanying and confounding the ongoing disease pandemic. Let us first turn our gaze to the anatomy of pandemic of fear and anxieties that accompany this health pandemic. The virus is an unknown enemy. A large part of the fear comes from our inability to wrap our heads around the source of our fear. What is this fear and disease about? How does it spread? What are its signs? We have been constantly befuddled by the nature of this disease. For one, its clinical manifestations are very protean. While scientists and doctors have come up with a list of core signs and symptoms that define the disease, we are constantly receiving news about the various other ways in which the disease is manifesting in the patients. There is news about rash on the skin, discoloration of fingers and toes, loss of sensory ability of taste and smell, conjunctivitis, and many other signs that are believed to be marking the disease. It makes us feel inept in pinning it down. The virus may vary little about the world, but the disease surely varies a lot. Yet another feature of the virus which befuddles us is its invisibility. The large number of asymptomatic yet positive cases of coronavirus are like Schrodinger's cat, which is alive and dead at the same time. One doesn't have the symptom, but one has the virus. The unreliability of screening tests, like the false positives, false negatives, and the cases of reappearance of infection, all has added to the medley of confusion. It cannot be seen because it is too little, and also too big, a worldwide contagion. The virus is not known to me, but it is too intimate, like present in the air I breathe, the doorknobs I touch, the vegetables and groceries I consume, the next door neighbor that I chat with, or worse, in friends and family I live with, or perhaps even in me, who knows? A potent source of anxiety is the terrifying realization that this affliction is passed on to us by our fellow humans, even our loved ones, and that we can have already passed it on to them. We all know that we are interdependent. To survive, we touch, we breathe the air, and we interact in the social world. But now, these reciprocal and material modes of intertwinements of our embodied social life have become unsafe and life-threatening. What this pandemic has exposed for us is the human vulnerability, not only in the usual sense of a condition of being potentially harmed by others through words or action, but by a mere sneeze or a touch. Psychodynamically speaking, this vulnerability is an uncanny experience of becoming aware of our capacity to kill, something we become aware of in our fits of rage and hatred, but it is more horrifying now because now it is without our bidding. We also now are more consciously aware of others' capacity to damage us, a terror that we have all lived through in the earliest parts of our lives and have repressed. Such threats of us being mutually dangerous to each other and even, even push out our psychic capacity to love and relate, because the intersubjective space is filled with paranoia, persecutory anxiety, hatred, anger, and destruction. Such fears are augmented when we feel that there is no one to seek protection from. Then one feels as if God is dead. In the beginnings of our lives, it is the maternal person and later the father who holds our anxieties, our badness, to make us feel safe and secure about ourselves and structure the reality. In the pandemic, it is the science, world bodies like WHO, our politicians, mass media, and eventually God that we look up to save us. But here again, we are feeling abandoned. With fake news, rumors, propaganda, conspiracy theories swirling around us, there is a general breakdown of trust in the authorities. The unpreparedness of the health infrastructure, lack of consensual medical information, apathy towards those who can't access healthcare facilities, layoffs, abandonment of migrant laborers and daily wagers are just few of the very glaring examples of how large sections of global society have just been orphaned by the establishments and governments around the world. With the protective sheath of trust and hope of rescue being taken off, depression and suicide are on a rise. Due to contagion of fears and anxieties and absence of their containment by structures of authority, can panic be far behind? Poisoned by excessive information, propaganda, and fake news, human mind loses its ability to think and contain these fears and anxieties. In panic, the psychic skin that protects us from excessive threats is torn and pierced. Our senses are overwhelmed. The boundary between inside and outside is lost. Bodily integrity is threatened, and one feels as if one is dying. This unthinkable inner dread about the health and well-being of self and loved ones is, in a sense, what shapes the pandemic of panic. A classic example of this unthinkability is cases of people who commit suicide due to just a suspicion that they have the disease and the fear of the stigma that it brings. Faced by the threat of a disease that can infect us at any moment, people advise and perform the most irrational actions, like consuming disinfectants, hoarding toilet paper, drinking cow urine, which will actually do nothing to protect us. But that is something that is beyond our ability to think right now. Related to fear, anxiety, and panic is another constellation of psychological reactions, reactions of suspicion and stigmatization. There is hypervigilance and suspicion about everything. But paradoxically, it is not the virus which is literally seen as the object of fear. It is other people. They are the ones who are seen as potential carriers of illness and death. We have seen enough examples of this. Victims of the disease being ostracized, doctors and healthcare staff being discriminated against and even attacked physically, members of religious minorities and ethnic minorities being singled out, and vigilant actions taken by neighbors in an apparent effort to protect themselves better. The link between imagining disease and imagining the other is rooted in the notion of one's own home as a safe and clean place that must be protected from lethal diseases and the outsiders who carry them. This defensive displacement of the blame for contamination onto people is obvious in the way the infectious diseases are named after the place of their origin, like German measles, Spanish flu, South Asian respiratory syndrome, and the latest, the Chinese Wuhan virus, along with the xenophobia, which is aggravated by it. The process of othering the diseased and those suspected to be diseased relies on the intrapsychic mechanism of splitting, a primitive defense which is used to deal with persecutory anxiety, which separates the good from the bad, keeps the good with oneself, and projects the bad to the other, who is usually the mother in the earliest phase of our life. Gradually, we learn through our social experiences many targets to which bad can be imputed. The foreigner, the poor, the religious other are few such targets, which are serving as ready containers in times of pandemic to be treated as dangerous. Along with coronavirus, ideologically divisive viruses have also raised their ugly head during such contagion. Not only is there blaming, but also shaming and stigmatization. Othering leads to avoidance, segregation, and abuse. Personal fear may be translated into collective witch hunts. These psychological propensities can then be exploited by the stated and unstated agendas of authoritarian and fascist states. While a lot is being spoken of the two emotional constellations, which is fear and othering, I think that in the context of this pandemic, more attention needs to be paid to the experience of grief at losses that people are experiencing and the guilt of surviving while so many amongst us perish. New losses are being created by the COVID pandemic. The most tragic, of course, is the loss of human lives due to COVID. But people are losing their lives also due to unavailability of healthcare for other serious diseases and due to deep poverty. And then there are daily reminders of death. Loss of job, loss of routine, loss of plans for future, loss of unself-conscious and taken for granted notions of safety, loss of human contact and being together with loved ones. We are mourning a loss of the world we knew and grieving for the suffering that people are going through world over. There is a crippling sense of helplessness at the going-ons. One of the things that has happened during the pandemic is that we don't have the usual protections that keep the idea of death at a distance. Death is ever more present than it usually is nowadays in our daily lives. People are surrounded by it in the news, in stories from friends and loved ones, and in the sirens of the ambulances. Grieving and mourning for the dead has also been altered by this pandemic. Many people are dying apart from their loved ones, and many others are mourning apart from theirs. Not being at your person's bedside at the end of their life adds extra layers of suffering. It might add guilt at one's unavailability in the last moments. There is also a lot of uncomfortable survivor guilt around the coronavirus because the virus is transmitted by close contact. Someone might think, I just saw my mother 2 weeks back. Maybe I gave it to her. When someone dies of COVID-19 or due to some other disease, but during this time, their death occurs against the backdrop of a historic event, instead of being a self-contained story all by itself. This fact could shape the grieving process. For some, it could mean a support in collective mourning, and for some, it can mean reduction to a number and an erasure of personal significance. One can also have a grief reaction for anything that is really a part of our identity. And people are losing their identities right now. Someone opened a new business a couple of months ago, and now it is going to go under. That was their dream, and now it's gone. In India, to see the famous Wankhede Stadium in Mumbai to become a quarantine center is a cause of grief for a lot of Mumbaikars, for whom the stadium is a symbol of their city's heritage. These losses are more abstract than deaths, but grieving them is no less valid. The pandemic has exposed the wide gaps of income and wealth, inequality in access to healthcare, safe shelter, and food. There is a greater likelihood of deaths in the groups who fall on the disadvantaged side of the divide. This triggers very uncomfortable guilt of one's own privilege and complicity in sustaining the inequality. Is the cure worse than the disease? It is also important to reflect what are the emotional costs of the ways of mitigating the risks associated with this worldwide pandemic. The crucial mechanisms of breaking the chain of infection include lockdown of cities, social distancing, isolation, and quarantine. All these measures evoke ambivalent emotions of relief and terror as they pit human safety against human freedom during the pandemic times. Lockdown, isolation, and quarantine conjure the fear of being watched and caged and breakdown of social relationships. State surveillance of our personal life is at an all-time high in the form of mandatory disclosure of travel history, contact tracing, detention of people suspected of being infected, surveillance apps, and the list goes on. Social distancing and lockdown serve the purpose of slowing the spread, morbidity, and mortality of the disease. But it is also potentially antisocial, leading first to mistrust and withdrawal, and then to exclusion, ostracism, or even persecution of the scapegoated other. The clarion call of stay home, stay safe is not equally reassuring for all. Not everyone experiences the privacy to carry on their routines, a collective sharing of personal beliefs and biases within family, protection within the four walls. Instead, there may be suffocation, intrusion, and violence. Also, what about millions of homeless people or people living in cloistered spaces? Staying home is no way a recipe of staying safe for them. For many children, school is a safe, joyful space. Also a space where they get food. That is no longer available to them. So I come to the last part of my presentation, which is about imagining the new normal. This is a question which is raising its head repeatedly. How will our post-corona world look like? Will it be better? Will it be same? Will it be worse? Will it be more equitable, democratic, and compassionate? Will our enhanced awareness of interdependency create higher walls against others or bigger expanse of solidarity with others? History tells us that after such global crises, some things become better, some things deteriorate, and many times old habits do persist. Perhaps there are many small and big answers to this, which needs to be searched for in personal and collective spaces. A lot depends upon the way we experience and process this crisis. From a vantage point of being relatively safe and protected, or from a vantage point of feeling unsafe, persecuted, and abandoned. While we all may be in the same storm, but we may be in different boats. Imagination is a way of gathering our world and taking ownership of our worlds. When going on being is disrupted, the reality is too impinging, and one is caught up in reacting to it. Then imagination becomes difficult. So the question also is, are we ready to dream or imagine? Or is it too premature, caught as we are in the trauma of the pandemic? For as long as the anxieties and dread overwhelm us, we may struggle to feel a strong sense of responsibility and concern for others. The hope is that to the extent that we are able to use our personal and collective resourcefulness and heal our psyches and build solidarities, we may be able to dream our dreams and also fuel our dreams for the collective good. Thank you.
Thank you, Parul. So now we go to the second presentation. Guadalupe López, we welcome you.
Let's just set a little bit my presentation. And I share my screen with you. It should be this one. Just a second. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, brilliant. So hello everyone, I am Guadalupe López-Íñiguez, a Spanish musician and interdisciplinary researcher based in Finland. I hold a PhD in psychology from the Autonomous University of Madrid in Spain, and a master's degree in classical music performance from the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, Finland. I'm currently adjunct professor of music education at the Sibelius Academy, which is one of the arts faculties within the University of the Arts Helsinki. I am the vice president of the Spanish Society for Psychology of Music and Music Performance and a freelance cellist. Within my research, my main goal is changing the entire traditional teaching and learning paradigm in Western classical instrumental studies. So I have specialized in the study of the psychological processes behind musical performance and music teaching and learning, while also attending to sociocultural and educational issues. And I also play concerts and make recordings. So I would like to say, first of all, thanks a lot to Parul for her presentation and to Natalya who will present later. And it would be much nicer to meet you all in real life, especially in Paris, for this amazing conference. But I especially hope that everyone listening to us is safe and healthy wherever you guys are. So my talk addresses the severe difficulties that an educational field like music education is facing globally. In particular, I will focus my talk on higher music education, which is the context where the preparation of the future professional musicians takes place. So here I refer mostly to superior conservatoires of music and universities of music all over the world. For this talk, I'm going to spotlight the particular problems the music field is facing during the COVID-19 pandemic, putting the accent on the difficulties that music teachers in particular are going through, but also the situation of their students and the overall economic crisis that this pandemic has caused for music performers. Although my talk is focused on higher music education, many of these issues are also happening at lower levels of music education. So also at the beginning stages. The music education field has suffered from this pandemic in especially strong ways because this education tradition is a little bit different than those of other fields you might be more familiar with, I don't know. So in connection to this problem, I have to also describe today what are the characteristics of one-on-one or one-to-one instrumental and vocal tuition in higher music education, because there usually is one teacher and one student in a closed classroom. Because part of the severity of this pandemic crisis in our music field relates to the ways in which generally teach and learn music performance at formal institutions, which is rather different, as I said, from other specializations. For instance, you might be thinking, what is the difference between learning music performance or learning contemporary history or mathematics in online and virtual contexts? Well, there are several differences, and I hope this talk will make clear that fields like music, dance, theatre, circus, sports, and the like are more severely damaged in this crisis because these are all embodied disciplines and need of a special pedagogies attending to the body-mind dualism and connectivity. So I will also address the types of music teaching and learning activities that are taking place during the pandemic and how that might compromise or support the basic psychological needs of individuals, which, as you know, are relatedness, competency, and autonomy. Connecting to this, I will present at the end of my talk a couple of research projects linked to the COVID-19 in music, in which I am a PI or collaborator, and in which we intend to study both psychological and sociocultural sociocultural aspects present in the teachers, music teachers' approaches to all ways of dealing with the pandemic, while they still try to continue facilitating their students' learning during and after the pandemic. So let's start. The COVID-19 epidemic is the largest global, albeit forced, social experiment in the field of professional musicians education. It has had shockingly negative consequences in a field which is extremely fragile. As you know, whenever there is an economic crisis, arts is one of the first fields to suffer from the money cuts, right? And for some professional exceptions, like those enjoying full-time orchestral or teaching posts, or for those international star figures of instrumental soloists, opera singers, conductors of fancy orchestras or composers, the music scene is heavily represented by the freelancing community, whose work would easily enjoy a salary raise for their expertise and hours spent working, to be honest with you. So the impact of COVID-19 on instrumental and vocal teaching and learning in higher music education and performing arts education, particularly in traditional Western classical music, has been devastating for teachers as well as students. The epidemic has fundamentally changed the globally dominant higher music education, pedagogical setting and context, which has long been based on the centuries-old European master-apprentice tradition. This tradition is an embodied practice carried out through face-to-face live interaction, taking place behind closed doors in the music studio. In this top-down hierarchical context, the teacher is not considered a learner, but the highest expert and authority. I propose here that classical music instruction is perhaps, within education overall, the last ivory tower resisting digital literacy, despite effective online models of higher music education, such as the iClassical Academy or the Berkeley online system. This music education field has resisted these digital change, as I just said, including distant learning, due to the nature of music performance, which, as you can see in these images, involves complex body-mind processes and skills acquired by alert, non-verbal observation of rather precise movements, nuanced bodily auditive modeling with occasional direct physical stimulation to point out at particular bodily aspects when performing, and carefully control live sound production. This means in real time and in a specific halls or sound isolated classrooms or studios. So we need something very particular for music teaching and learning to happen in normal situations. So the epidemic has therefore dramatically interrupted this practice on many levels by imposing a process of forced innovation that has turned the tradition completely upside down. So the social spatial restrictions caused by the COVID-19 have enforced an unchosen intervention into the current one-on-one pedagogical tradition, recontextualizing it towards completely remote teaching and learning via information and communication technologies. The music students, digital natives, have been more prepared to deal with the new online interactions, where their teachers are in need of support to facilitate music education in times of crisis. So this is a major social experiment that has taken place, as I said, globally. Different generations of music teachers, especially the digitally lost generation, that of older and more experienced teachers, have had to urgently learn how to navigate these technologies to facilitate the learning of the digital natives. So this is an interruption, and this kind of interruption involves resistance, naturally, as higher music education teachers and experts of performance have encountered an alien reality that is not constructed by them and within which is up to them. It is up to them to make the jump, to learn what is needed, to change their pedagogical practices. So they have to do something completely new within such a centuries-based tradition, something in many cases unnatural because of this embodied element. So from this perspective, it could be understood that the world is pushing the pedagogical boundaries of music teachers who did not choose the situation, well, who did, but the situation is nevertheless teaching them to live with it, or at least most of them, as some are rather reluctant to change, so the teachers have to let the content teach them. And this has several sociocultural and psychological implications. So I understand this as a pedagogy of interruption in the terms of the stuff. The COVID-19 interruption has also, on the other hand, thinking positively, created a new sense of collaboration and solidarity in the arts and cultural sector as a whole, with hundreds, you have seen them, hundreds of social media posts and groups sharing expertise and supporting each other through new forms of digital production of collective performances. For instance, remote produced choir performances with over 1,000 singers. There are many beautiful examples from many countries. So I therefore hypothesize that this dramatic interruption may also have brought balance to this dominant understanding of the hierarchy of expertise in music performance, and maybe refocus the reflective thinking of teachers from seeing artistic quality as the sole criteria for pedagogical quality towards a better appreciation of the quality of social interaction, connection, and responsibility towards others in general. So what are these music teachers doing and what is needed? First, in the very best scenario, both teacher and students should count on, in addition to the musical instrument and maybe some music scores, they should own several and rather expensive technological devices. First, one would need proper internet connection, because in other fields it's okay to experience some connection faults which interrupt the conversation, yet, as you know, you might get a sense of what is said within the context. But in music, missing out listening to some notes from a performance when internet goes momentarily down could mean that the notes were wrong. And one has to work on improving them, or that they were played well, but the teacher is not completely sure, so the student has to play it again. All this takes time to be solved and would not happen in a normal face-to-face situation, which makes these lessons a bit more exhausting. And this is one of the several examples I could use to illustrate this connection failure. In addition, for instrumental and vocal learning, the regular internet connection people have in any house, at least in Western countries, is not good enough either, because in the case the teacher would like to play something at the same time as the student, or the teacher would like to give feedback, verbal feedback, immediately upon the student playing, the signal from the sound production of the student to the sound reception by the teacher and vice versa is too slow. Or the comments by either of them come a tiny bit later than they should, therefore taking time from the real learning. It's kind of rather confusing if we compare to the normal life situation. We keep on giving verbal and musical feedback while the student is playing. That's very normal. But here, everything is a little bit delayed. So even with the best powerful technology connections, such as GEANT, the ARNet, National Network, or CERNet, synchronous distance learning in music education is not ideal. The sound signal will always be late. LOLA, the low latency audio video platform, has helped music teachers and students tremendously in this respect. It improves quite a lot the problem, yet it cannot be compared with a live lesson. And this is affecting the mood of those involved in music learning quite a bit already, but this is not all. I keep on mentioning all these aspects because this is then later connected to the psychological needs satisfaction. So in addition, one should navigate several and rather different platforms, as we are doing today for online learning, such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Skype, Apple's FaceTime, and those more oriented towards the music field, such as GarageBand, Audacity, Logic, or Voice Lessons app, just to mention a few. Here again, people might feel extremely frustrated if they have to pay with their own money for some of these, in case their institutions do not offer licenses for them, but also because different students might favor different platforms. So teachers need to be versed on all of them, which takes some energy. Not to speak about teaching from your kitchen while your little boy or little girl is playing Legos, right? So apart from this, one nowadays generally owns a tablet or a laptop, but the average screen size is rather small to properly observe what is going on with the physicality of the student when manipulating a musical instrument. So the modeling of the teacher in details. So ideally, both the student and the teacher should have wider screens, but also properly positioned webcams with their corresponding tripods or stands, which would cover several angles of the playing movements and also distances. So to see something very small in the fingers, to see the whole body position and balance, etc. Mirrors showing additional angles are not a bad idea either to expand the visual coverage of cameras. And good lighting improves picture quality, which is crucial for musicians, even more than the webcams in themselves. So investing in this would also be important to facilitate the quality of interaction and instruction and the emotional connection between teacher and student. However, if seeing what happens during the lessons clearly, and if possible without connection interruptions, seems important for musicians, even more so is the sound quality of the playing. For this, both teacher and students should have decent external mics, which capture certain features that are crucial in assessing whether what is being produced musically needs improvement in any way. And for this reason, it's highly recommended using a nice pair of headphones, preferably without a mic and non-noise cancelling ones. So this can eliminate the co-occurrence of feedback loops and allow both teachers and students to experience the online lesson in a much more immersive way, closer to the face-to-face live interaction. So this can, of course, work for some months. For those music teachers and students who have been working together for some time and know the sound world and the personality traits of each other, so they can somehow imagine the reality of what is being produced musically and how people are feeling in these demanding times, although never as good as during the face-to-face interaction in a proper hall or sound-isolated classroom. Teaching in any other way and with less resources of what I just explained, at least in music, would be purely surviving. Not really high-quality instruction, and therefore it won't have deep and positive implications on our students' learning. But here we have another huge problem, and this is the entrance examinations to access higher music education institutions, which are taking place now, right now, in several countries, and will keep on happening after the holiday break. Because here it is not so clear one gets the full sound picture of an aspiring student you have never heard or met before. So in which case, this person should use a proper video camera and just send a video. But again, the pre-recording of an exam performance is rather different psychologically than performing even online in front of a jury, like what we would face in the non-COVID-19 reality in music. So we will have a panel of experts evaluating whether what you play is worth for getting a place into the institution. So with this kind of pre-recordings, you cannot measure certain things like a possible stage fright of the student when performing publicly. It's an artificial situation, so you cannot assess this, and then maybe you are getting somebody into the academy, into the institution who has this and you didn't notice. Not that you should penalize the person because of that, but you should be aware to help. So summarizing this part, there are different ways to solve some of these problems with audio and video reception and softwares. For this, there are dozens, as you know, of recent and excellent blog posts by music experts who are enthusiastic about technology and share their tips for knowing the tricks and hacks of different programs. But as you are already discovering, taking care of these few aspects I mentioned takes some time and an awful amount of money from both teachers and students in order to make the music thing work as it should within the circumstances. So we have here two main problems that have a strong connection to the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of the basic psychological needs. One, students are definitely better prepared to navigate technologies, as they mostly belong to the Z generation nowadays of digital natives and are eager to share their tips with colleagues and teachers, which is nice if we link this to the human relatedness, because it enhances a nice collaboration and friendly teaching and learning environment. So that's lovely. However, all students might not necessarily have the economic resources to acquire these expensive technologies because they come from humble backgrounds or have big loans to cover their studies if they live abroad or something like that. In addition, some of them might need to use musical instruments such as special pianos or harpsichords or types of percussion, which are located at the institutions that are right now, closed. So they cannot practice daily and prepare for the lessons, and they are losing some of their physicality. This is impeding their learning. It is making them less advantaged than those with more resources or with more access to the resources. And it is severely affecting on the self-efficacy, the self-confidence, the motivation, and the identity development of these aspiring musicians, maybe if this continues for a lifetime. In sum, this compromises these students' competency and autonomy as learners and future professionals. If we think about the teachers, on the other hand, and particularly thinking of those with a decent and regular income, these can acquire the technologies, as I said, even with their own pocket money, but they might need a lot of time to learn how to use them. Although there are exceptions of very enthusiastic and versed people in the ICT, the so-called lost generation of older and, as I said, usually more experienced teachers needs lots of support here because they feel really lost and exhausted with so much information suddenly. This is not their fault. They only want to help their students, but it's just overwhelming. So they are spending too many hours in everlasting online meetings, learning through blog posts and so on. But these teachers, they are responsible, let's not forget, of preparing their students. Remember, the next generation of professional musicians who will play concerts for you guys. For no concerts whatsoever. There are no concerts this year. Most of the things have been canceled, at least for a little while, which is rather depressing for people who have spent most of their lives performing for others and making part of their living by combining their studies with casual gigs at the higher education level. I mean, at professional levels. There is no relatedness with the audience, nor between the students and teachers, except by means of online or virtual artificial channels. We are talking here about people whose professional and personal identities are not really separated from their instrument and musical identity, which connects to the embodied aspect of bodily disciplines I mentioned before. In any case, ideally, these lessons should happen online, but many are reporting that they send videos to the teachers and then they have a phone or video call to chat about what to improve or how, because their teachers experience difficulties using Zoom, for instance. So to avoid the decay of motivation from both teachers and students and the decrease of effective time spent, we should first of all investigate what kind of good practices and technologies facilitate an online environment for music education that is as close as possible to the ideal face-to-face interaction. What are the positive aspects of online education that expand the traditional pedagogic models? But we should also equip those students who have less resources so that they can keep learning, as well as prepare the music teachers to cope with the situation. This influences on the mental well-being of both teachers and students, and some might not have equal access to education and the others might feel overwhelmed. So I don't want to expand more on this. As you can imagine, we could go on for hours. It's a very specific field of education. But I want to leave you with a couple of great online music conferences that took place during the last days, in which experts in these technological aspects offer incredibly useful insights that are applicable to other educational fields. And they also dealt with psychological issues. So one is the online conference, Teaching Music Online in Higher Education, that was organized by the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music in Australia, and the other, the Brain, Cognition, Emotion and Music Online Conference, organized by the University of Kent in the UK. In addition, you can check the initiatives by the work group of the Association of European Conservatoires on the digitalization of music education. So during the last 5 minutes of my talk, I'm going to present the research I plan to do on the COVID-19 in relation to music education as I describe all these problems. So this is still very much depending on the resources I can count on in the next days, as some funding applications have been submitted for this. First of all, I aim to salvage and build upon the positive impacts of the experimentation, pedagogical innovations, and novel learnability and teaching strategies that are being developed in higher music education, instrumental and vocal pedagogy globally. I also will attend to the attitudinal changes that emerge towards technology, assisting pedagogical practice in particular. So we are talking here about growth and fixed mindset, the learner identities of teachers who want to grow, who want to learn, who want to develop in difficult times. In addition, my research seeks to gather global evidence of the revolutionary changes during and after the COVID-19 pandemic in order to prepare future generations of instrumental and vocal teachers for their unknown future by reimagining inclusive and revolutionary education opportunities. In addition to this, I have an ongoing research collaboration with a research group on the acquisition of musical knowledge at the Faculty of Psychology of the Madrid Autonomous University in Spain. And we are studying right now the approaches to teaching and learning that teachers are adopting in the music classroom, from more traditional to more constructive. This is within the implicit theories of learning. So we are a team of 8 people with funding from the Spanish Ministry of Innovation and Science, who combine music and psychology as their expertise and have recently launched a Likert type scale survey in which we study if the lessons being taught during the pandemic could be situated more in the spectrum of that of more traditional, reproductive, content-oriented and teacher-centered instruction, or on the other pole, meaning more constructive, expressivist, holistic, and student-centered education. So we have 36 questions for teachers at different educational levels in this case, in which they can share with us completely anonymously what they are actually doing right now to facilitate their instrumental and vocal students' learning. These questions cover the verbal and procedural activities the teachers facilitate, the attitudes, emotions, and behaviors that are encouraged during the lessons, as well as the values and emotional control that the teachers favor among their students. In addition to the dialogical interaction activities proposed, if anything, between groups of students, as well as the types of evaluation taking place, whether formative or summative. This can give an idea if a music education context, as traditional as I described in the beginning of my talk, shifts toward more constructive pedagogy and psychology when interrupted drastically, or if it roots even more deeply in the tradition of the master-apprentice model. I'm happy to share some insights of what we saw in Qualtrics a few days ago after we gathered a few hundreds of respondents for this survey, but we have still a few weeks to go to collect data, so these are just tendencies, but rather interesting results. So to end my talk, I hope this couple of research initiatives and collaboration regarding the COVID-19 effects on higher music education will offer high quality knowledge on the emerging pedagogy and practice taking form globally in higher music education. I hope my research could further the equitable development of professional musicians education. This could in turn lead to an existential shift in performing arts education from achieving musical quality and excellence at all costs towards putting more emphasis on the quality of social interaction between teachers and students and their connection to listeners in online contexts. Experts say more crises will hit us globally, so the earlier we gather this knowledge and share it with the people involved in educating others in any field, the earlier everyone will experience psychological well-being and deliver high-quality teaching for other people's deep learning. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much, dear Guadalupe. So now we go to the last presentation, which is mine. Okay, so one moment. Yeah, so I hope you see my screen. Give me some sign. Do you see it? Yeah. So hello, dear friends and colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank all conference organizers and participants and to present myself. My name is Natalya Ulanova. I received a PhD degree in psychology in Moscow State University of Psychology and Education. And currently I hold the position of senior researcher in the Institute of African Studies of the Russian Academy of Science. Today my presentation, I would like to highlight the problem of students' mobility, and in particular from sub-Saharan Africa in times of ongoing crisis. In 2019, in the year before the COVID-19 outbreak, UNESCO presented a global educational monitoring report. To a bitter irony, the report was called Migration, Displacement and Education, Building Bridges, Not Walls. And now less than a year has passed and most of the people all around the world have literally been separated by walls, even if it's the walls of our own houses. As far as we can see now, from where we are now, COVID pandemic can only be the first stage of much more larger crisis, which will cover most of spheres of human activity around the world. Within the framework of this conference, much has been said about the problems of people of various risk groups, including migrants and displaced persons. As in the UNESCO report mentions, the training and integration of migrants is an important part of integrative process around the world. But there is another important part of global education and cultural exchange that may be at risk. It is the mobility of students and professionals. As a specialist who is now studying primary and higher education in sub-Saharan Africa, I am primarily concerned about how the crisis will affect the support of the training of highly qualified specialists in the interest of improving the well-being of people and the sustainable development of these countries. I would like to share my thoughts and concerns in this area with you in my presentation. So the first part of my report will be devoted to the situation in this field before the COVID-19 outbreak, and the onset of the global crisis. In the second part, I will share my vision of threats and opportunities that open up in the area of the modern crisis and after it. Over the past 15 years, the total number of students in sub-Saharan Africa has increased from more than 2 to more than 6 million. The demand for higher education from the growing middle class is a huge field of upcoming work for the national governments, as well as a big opportunity for foreign universities. In the past 5 years, near 400,000 students from Africa have studied abroad annually. Enormous amounts of money are being allocated by African governments to such training. According to World Bank data, in 2003 to 2008, among 80% of public tertiary educational expenditures in sub-Saharan Africa went to scholarship to support study abroad. About half of all students studying abroad are from 7 countries: Nigeria, Morocco, Algeria, Cameroon, Tunisia, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. Among the most popular destinations are France, South Africa, United Kingdom. Recently, the geography of education mobility of African students has expanded significantly due to United States, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Malaysia, Italy, and Australia. At the same time, it is underlined that other countries have entered the market, including China and Russian Federation. The market for educational services brings countries leaders in this area a good income. A national higher educational system in recent years have increased competition for attracting international students. The United States confidently holds leadership, hosting almost a quarter of all students who choose to study abroad. In the second place is the United Kingdom, and 3 main English-speaking countries, USA, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, account for 50% of all foreign students. Financial support for students' mobility can also act as support for the countries. For example, the European Development Fund Academic Mobility Program provides access to higher education for students from Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific regions. Or, for example, Russian Federation provides free places in universities for foreign students, including students from Africa. But such support measures only make sense if students return to their homeland after training. It is quite obvious that the educational mobility of students in a rather large percentage can be connected with the plans to stay in the country of study and not to return home, having received a well-paid job. And sometimes such a scenario is interesting for countries providing educational services, especially when it comes to highly qualified specialists. In recent years, when the scale of high knowledge-based and innovation-based economy has grown globally, some countries have tried to not only stimulate the recruitment of foreign students, but also to retain them in their labor markets. Students and skilled workers' mobility, known as brain drain, can negatively affect poor countries. And this situation does not always suit the governments of countries that allocate money to educate their students and are interested in the return of a higher qualified specialist to their homeland. For example, in 1909, Algeria sought to limit the scholarship to study abroad for the best graduate students. At some point, Uganda demanded that doctors wishing to continue their studies abroad undertake a written commitment to return. Russian experience in teaching students from Africa shows that such an emphasis in teaching foreign students is possible. In Russia, such a practice originated in Soviet times and always had the priority of training professional personnel for future work at home. Since the 50s of last century, tens of thousands of African students have got their higher education on the basis of the first Soviet and then Russian universities to work in industry, agriculture, transport, and social spheres. More than 70,000 students from Africa are currently studying in Russia. Of these, near 2,000 people were enrolled only in 2019 at the annual quota that Russian government provides to foreign citizens for admission the free places in Russian universities. Students from sub-Saharan Africa today account for 5.3% of all foreign students studying in Russia. Recently, the dynamics of student mobility from African countries has remained positive. A number of students increased from more than 4,000 to more than 13,000. A large number of students in 2070 came from Nigeria, Angola, Ghana, Republic of Congo, Zambia, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Namibia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and South Africa. Nowadays, surveys of students from African countries studying in Russia show that the vast majority of them plan to return home after completing their studies. More than half of students from sub-Saharan Africa say that they can easily get a job with a diploma from Russian university at home. 15% are confident that their professional activities will be related with the work in Russian companies, and another 46% do not exclude this possibility. Two of the most popular areas of study in Russia among students from Africa are engineering and medicine. In general, students from Africa undergo training in such specialties as medical business, dentistry, pharmaceutical industry, economic, oil and gas industry, construction, electric power, electric engineering, design, informational technologies, and communication systems. Nearly half of students have government subsidies for training. But it is interesting to note that training programs for specialists in conjunction with the Russian companies working directly in African countries have begun to be prepared. As a part of the Russian-African Grand Summit in the fall of 2019, it was planned to open several large projects in the field of specialist training for sub-Saharan Africa. But now all these programs are in question. Moreover, the entire summer admission campaign of foreign students to universities is open to a question too. COVID-19 pandemic and the following crisis challenged this practice in Russia and all over the world. Obviously, the situation in the field of students' mobility may undergo challenges in the next few years. In the next few slides, I will try to present my vision of the critical issues related to the possible changes of student mobility, especially from sub-Saharan Africa. For now, it seems that the world may face the reduction of student exchange in the coming years, and this can affect the entrance into the high qualified labor force in the countries of sub-Saharan Africa. However, this situation can stimulate the development of internal educational system if the funds allocated by governments for students' mobility are redirected to their own higher education. Mobility restrictions can push development of digital services for education all over the world. Nowadays, it's more clear than that online education can one day become not only an additional, but the only possible educational channel. Unfortunately, we can say that sub-Saharan African countries are not fully prepared for this new era. In a big UNESCO report, Digital Services and Education in Africa in 2015, were underlined that in many African countries, schools face the lack or poor quality of teaching materials, not even digital devices for education, but simple textbooks. The connection of the African continent using fiber optics has been moving forward in the last decade, but still in a very desperate way. At the same time, the spread of mobile devices in Africa is very rapid, and education can become the main level for growth in educational ICT in Africa. Active use of ICT devices and software educational tools will need the establishment of guiding principles and teaching and organization of specialist teachers training. It should be noted that some countries managed to start large-scale programs. For example, a large digital literacy program in Kenya launched by the Kenya Department of Education. This is one of the broadest educational programs in Africa to date. It included both providing internet access and the supply of tablet computers, as well as educational and training programs for school children and teachers. In general, the program showed that results, despite the slight discrepancy in the pace of development of network technologies and the development of specific training software. But it is obvious that such programs require development both in Kenya and in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Difficulties in mastering knowledge with the help of distance technologies in the absence of necessary practice among students from sub-Saharan Africa are also noticeable in Russian educational practice. We've contacted teachers and students of one of the central Russian universities and are planning to conduct a research project in which African students will give feedback on the status of access to digital learning in their countries. And we'll talk about their online learning experience in Russia. But even now, according to the first data received, it is clear that this issue is critically important for students and requires additional attention. So ongoing support programs are encouraging, but it is now clear that much more should be done to ensure access to digital education for sub-Saharan students. Perhaps current situation will help draw public attention to ensure equal rights for all people to have access to universal human achievements, which include education and culture in their online forms too. As already mentioned, we can hope that the governments of African countries will begin to spend more money previously spent on students' mobility to ensure stability and openness of their own educational system. And cultural and educational institutions around the world will make universal access to knowledge more accessible. The worldwide lockdown period and this conference in particular show that it is possible to do it in coherence and consolidation. I want to believe that we will go through these difficult times of separation, and academic and students exchange will reactivate. And here I would like to draw attention to an important aspect that may accompany any human mobility in the coming years. This is the increase of intolerance towards people from other places. In Russia, we faced this almost from the first days of the first outbreak of COVID-19 in Wuhan, which coincided with the end of the New Year holidays in Russia and the return of Chinese students to study. In a period of uncertainty, growing anxiety, and absence of feasible reactions from the authorities, several cases of intolerance towards the people with Asian appearance were observed in several regions of Russia, and some of them occurred in the student dormitories. Currently, we have more information, test systems, and quarantine practice for travelers, but the possibility of biased attitude towards visitors cannot be ruled. Moreover, this may apply to visitors from sub-Saharan Africa. This region is traditionally considered to be epidemiologically unstable in the popular mind. Understanding all this, we consider it as important to draw the attention of the authorities, university administrations, and ordinary people to this problem. Informing and observing safety measures should reduce anxiety and avoid cases of intolerance towards students and each other. Human exchange and students' mobility are extremely important factors of global educational and cultural dialogue. By supporting sustainable development of educational system in all countries of the world, we will ensure the maintaining of equal rights of all people. Support and development of decent learning and using ICT in education can help us to save an economic and social development of nations. Among other countries, sub-Saharan Africa remains a critical region, especially in development of education and ICT technologies. The maintenance of stable development of all regions of the Earth during the crisis era is, in our opinion, concerns all inhabitants of the planet, and ensuring equal access to knowledge, both in the level of human mobility and at the level of development of digital technologies, plays a crucial role for this process. Thank you very much for your attention. So now I think we can come to some kind of post-presentational speeches and questions. And I want to thank my colleagues, Parul and Guadalupe. And please allow me to start with my question to Parul. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And yes, it was very important to understand, to hear once again that this feeling or of grief which people now are all facing is the same in other countries. And so I want to ask you about the practice of funeral that nowadays that you have in India. Because in Russia, it is a big problem. We have many relatives do not have an opportunity to say goodbye to their relatives. So how is it going in India? It's the first question. And the second, unfortunately, in Russia, we faced some cases of suicide of patients. Some of patients with a COVID diagnosis and some patients who were just locked in the hospitals without a diagnosis. Did you hear something about this in your country?
Natalya, these are very interesting questions. The first one about the funeral. Well, yes, that's something which is, the practice has altered in India because the government has specified a number of people who can be present in a funeral. India is a collectivist society, and occasions like death, marriage, birth are typically attended by a lot of people. So in that sense, there is a huge sizing down of the number of people who can attend, and many people who may be very much close to that person would not be able to attend the funeral because either they cannot travel because of the travel bans, or even if they are within the city, it's not possible to commute. So only very, very close people would be able to attend the funeral. Recently, there has been a incident which had which was reported very much in the media about a very popular Indian actor, Irfan Khan, who himself also unfortunately died a few days back because of cancer. His mother passed away a couple of days before he died, and they were in two different cities, and he could not attend the funeral because they were in two different cities. He himself was quite unwell, so he had to do a FaceTime. And there are several such incidents which are being reported. So the experience of grieving, mourning, bereavement, I believe is likely to get quite altered due to the pandemic. Also about people committing suicide, again, yes, there have been media reports of that kind where sometimes on a mere suspicion of a person, of someone having a relative having, a wife having an infection has led the husband to commit suicide. So, and also a case of a young person, an adolescent committing suicide because he was tested positive. So all of these kinds of things are happening, and they are extremely disturbing.
Thank you very much, Parul. I think we have some question as written. So can you see it?
Yes.
So I believe that the question from Nicholas, yes, I'm glad to see you again too. So I think it's a question for you. Yesterday, Mark Freeman talked about the luxury of being able to hope, ergo, and uneven distribution of hope. Your cases seem to point to a similar, rather grim view of Corona situation, that it propels hopelessness among men. What can the role of psychology and education be in reinstalling hope here? Should they perhaps collaborate more closely together, and if so, how? Or is it merely a question of current limited digital access to educational and psychological services?
Yes, I'm quite aware of the fact that my presentation does, hinge on a bit of a pessimistic picture of the COVID situation as it is unraveling worldwide and specifically in India. I think psychology and education can greatly contribute to alleviate this kind of a helplessness, hopelessness, grief, anxiety that we are witnessing in an almost pandemic form right now. For one, I think psychology can, help people to process the crisis in a better way. Because a lot of problems, mental health problems, get created when people do not process the experience properly, when they do not understand that they are not able to label their feelings and what is going on with them. When they do not understand that their current trauma, which they are experiencing at the moment, may actually be a reawakened trauma. It's something which is triggering something from their past, and the current situation is adding fuel to the fire. So some of these kinds of psychological dynamics can be sort of dealt with psychological services, which have been quite expanding themselves. But yes, they are limited to people who have access to them via technology. They are not accessible in India to people. Psychological services of these kinds are not accessible to people in India who do not have internet access. Which is a big limitation. And similarly, we are also finding that even educational services are not available to people who have stable and consistent internet services. So that digital divide is a big issue. But surely psychology and education together can help people mentalize this crisis, and also, as I said, help them to dream now, deal with their trauma and recover, heal themselves, and perhaps imagine an alternative world for themselves and for the collective.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one more comment. So it's from Harinder Sandhu. I would appreciate a cultural lens of the fear of this pandemic.
Yes, that would have been a different and a completely new presentation in itself, the cultural construction of the pandemic crisis. But yes, I do have some ideas of how how this crisis is being constructed in a very typical sense in the Indian context. For one, India again is a deeply religious country, and we have witnessed some of the worst that religion can unleash on humanity. And in line with that, we have been seeing, a rise in Islamophobia, deepening of the divide between the Hindus who are in majority and Muslims who are in minority in India. They being scapegoated, and all of those kinds of trends are on a rise. But along with that, I also see how religion is also playing a very constructive role. For instance, we had a very heartwarming experience of the Sikhs, which is another religious group in India, sanitizing the mosque, the Jama Masjid, which is one of the biggest mosques in India on the occasion of Eid, which happened on Monday. So, the Gurudwaras have really come out big time, and they have been feeding the homeless, the migrant workers, and they have collaborated with the police, and they have been distributing food packets. So we have seen the best and the worst of religion at this point of time, which is a very unique Indian way of doing things. Also, along with that, I think my fear is that the notions of purity and pollution, which are quite universal, but in the Indian setup, we see it in the context of caste, untouchability, and all of those kinds of social structures that we have. Now, my fear is that this pandemic may just sharpen these kinds of divides between the pure and the polluted, the diseased and the non-diseased, and especially in the context of COVID-19, which spreads through touch. So something like untouchability, which is a very deep stratum in the Indian psyche, can actually attach itself very strongly with something like what this pandemic is all about, which is spread through touch. And the third aspect of the cultural construction, which I think may be of use, is that it would be interesting to see in times to come how the Indian family, which again is a very strong social system in our context, has withstood the onslaught of this pandemic. The Indian family is usually rolled in one kind of social structure. It is also our social security system, because we don't have anything coming from the government, right? So the family is effectively our social security system. So it is the one which takes care of the old and the young, who are particularly vulnerable in this pandemic. So how the families, the Indian family would, rise to the care of the most vulnerable members of its unit, and whether we will be able to see solidarity across people in taking forward this potential of care, which we are so used to doing at our homes, also into the society. So that is something which I think I would be keenly watching, and that will be a unique cultural aspect of India's reaction to the pandemic.
Thank you. So we don't, I think we have more questions. So again, question from Nicholas. Mine was actually also a question for you, Natalya, about the more deeply interlinked collaboration between education and psychology. And perhaps Guadalupe can also relate. You mentioned, for instance, the relevance of education administrators, Natalya. Did I misunderstand, or do educators and education administration be particularly psychologically and ethically sensitive in these times in order to be able to promote hope among students? Yes, I can say that, as I said, we contact some teachers and students from the Central University in Russia, working with African students. And in all universities in Russia and here the same, teachers try to give more support for the students that have to stay in the dormitories, in their rooms, and learn in a distant way with the help of media technologies. And they try to support and, yes, to give them hope or any kind of psychological help. Well, in practice, in universities, we have not only teachers, but also a kind of like a specialist who will help the group of the foreign students to live in the reality, to adaptate in university or in the country itself. So it seems to me that this crisis even brought them all together. So they're kind of feeling more united now because we are all in the same situation. So I think I have answered your question. So we have one more question. Hello everyone, I have a question to Parul. I'm from Indonesia, Bali Island. In your opinion, what is the model of individual flourishing during the pandemic? Thanks for great sharing.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I think you know, there is a lot of interest around this concern about flourishing and imagination of the new world in the post-COVID era. I think it's a little difficult to sort of think about it as of now, because the enormity of stress and the other detrimental emotions are so much that we are, you know, a large number of people are barely surviving. And, you know, so talking of thriving becomes a little tough, but nonetheless, attention must be paid to it. And I think one big step towards individual flourishing is to pay attention to what is happening with us, you know, what's happening with us internally. How are we dealing with this pandemic? Because eventually all kinds of actions in our personal life or in the outer social world will have to stem from an inner space of resoluteness and hope. So first, our own inner world has to be set in order, and hence an attunement to one's own self and a kind of backing up of the self with the hope, with resilience, with energy, positive energy is what is required as a first step. And then I think the second important thing, which I think is very important to deal with this kind of a global crisis, is to get connected with like-minded people. I think there is I can't hear.
Natalya, we can't hear you.
Yes. No. So, and the second thing is about solidarity, building solidarities with people, because you know, it provides a lot of personal support also, and it always helps to be together with people who share your visions of the world, because there are a lot of if I may say so, unethical imaginations of the new world also, which are floating around. And we have to, you know, safeguard ourselves against falling prey to that. So finding the right set of people and, you know, galvanizing our energies together is, I think, another very important step towards individual flourishing. So I think two things: attunement to one's own personal inner life, and secondly, building solidarities. I think this may save us and the world.
Thank you, Parul, and sorry, Natalya, but I think there is an issue with the voice. I would like to thank all of our amazing panelists for the talks today. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and your experience. And thank you for everyone who joined us today, and hope to see you later on other panels. And to let you know, if you didn't join yet, the conversation and the questions and the dialogue continues on Slack. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Natalya. Thank you, Guadalupe.
Thank you, Natalya and Parul. Thanks, everyone.